and we are now in the act of witness. Let us also look at the term daraba, daraba, which has often been misused in the debate about jihad. What does daraba in God's way really mean? If we take verses of the book as evidence, it simply connotes to travel the world and to travel fast for the purpose of trade, commerce, study, or research, as it is stated in the following verse. O you who believe, when either you go abroad in the cause of God, ضربتم في سبيل الله, investigate carefully and say not to anyone who offers you a salutation, you are none of a believer, coveting the perishable goods of this life. 9 Surah Nisa, verse 94. Three things can be deduced from how the above verse or the previous verse uses daraba in God's way. 1. The particle idha in Surah 4, verse 94, if when expresses a fulfillable condition, when you go abroad in the cause of God, there is no doubt about the possibility of going abroad and traveling the world. Then when the when particle is like the idha in the verse, when idha, the sun with his spacious light, is folded up, like as in takwir, verse 1, expressing a condition that is inevitably and naturally fulfilled. This is not the case if we assume the verse to mean killing or going to war in God's way. It's simply because peace is the base condition of life, while war is an exception to it. Wars do not happen because they are inevitable, natural, or essential to human life. They are rather accidental and anomalous, destroying the normal rhythm of social life. An interpretation of daraba as to kill would therefore not comply with the need to have a fulfillable condition required by idha. 2. The second part of Surah 4, verse 94, orders the believers not to reject greetings from a non-believer by saying you are not a believer, but exegetics enforcing a militant interpretation upon the verse, and by seeking textual support for the so-called sword verse of Surah Tawbah, claims to see not the expression of a greeting in al-salam, but rather the offering of a peace after a military struggle. We absolutely reject this interpretation because al-salam refers to greeting, peace be with you, in normal encounters of everyday life, and therefore it is not an offer of peace negotiation or a plea to save one's life when facing death by a Muslim warrior. We also think it is more plausible to render the phrase as you are not a believer, mu'minan, but rather as you are not safe or secure, mu'amminan, because the Arabic term mu'minan, believer, can also be read as mu'amminan, safe, secure. But be that as it may, what we want to stress that the exegetics hawkish reading of the verse can be thoroughly countered by a much more peaceful interpretation. 3. The verse concludes by linking the act of going abroad in God's way with the possibility to do it out of desire for the chance gains in this life. We believe that these chance gains in this life entail the pursuit of studies, the participation in conferences, the development of businesses, relations, meeting partners in tradition and commerce, even tourism. Traditional exegetics have claimed that this verse speaks negatively about the ephemeral good of this life, which are incompatible with the believer's quest for guidance and faith. We have shown that the phrase darabtum fi sabilillah in Surah 4, verse 94 should not be rendered to mean a belligerent fight in God's way. We propose as an alternative rendering to travel the world in God's way, in which the association with war and violence conflicts is entirely eliminated. The adverbial clause in God's way defines how one should go about things, stipulating a condition that must be met if someone is done in God's way. Something is done in God's way. The most important characteristics of human interaction in God's way is to speak fairly and gently, and to invite people with wisdom and eloquent preaching to live a God-centered life. Speak fair to the people. Baqarah 83. Invite all to the way of your Lord, Sabila Rabbika, with wisdom and beautiful preaching. Nahl 125. To travel the world means to leave home, while the one who travels is a muhajir. Surah 4 100. Proves that hijrah does not connote exile and life as an armed renegade, soldier, or guerrilla fighter, because such a dangerous muhajir would never find many a refuge wide and spacious. He who forsakes his home, min yuhajir, in the cause of God, fi sabilillah, finds in the earth many a refuge wide and spacious. Nisa 4 verse 100. To travel the world in God's way means to do business peacefully with the rest of the world. The condition is to do it in God's way. Owners of global companies must forsake their monopoly over the market if they want to do business in God's way. Salespeople must stop cheating and looking for a quick profit if they want to sell their products in God's way. Producers of groceries and dairy products must stop adulterating their food with unhealthy substance if they want to provide the supermarket with products in God's way. Joiners, tailors, carpenters, plumbers, painters, and so on all need to practice their trades diligently and competently, without overcharging their customers, if they want to do things in God's way. Surely one does not need to be a resistance fighter if he wants to travel the world in God's way. According to the book, astashhad does not mean martyrdom, but rather to give evidence as an eyewitness. Baqarah 282 and chapter 4:15. How is it possible that this term lost its Quranic meaning? We believe that the semantic shift occurred after Muhammad's death. We know that the Prophet classified jihad as either great or small. The greater jihad, he said, is the struggle of the soul against his animalistic passions and craving long term. The smaller jihad is armed defense in the event of external aggression short term and occasionally. In the latter works of fiqh, however, jihad becomes a technical term for armed conflicts with unbelievers. Believers had to be fought until they accepted Islam, and if they refused, they should be killed. Jihad in this technical sense was then qualified by the phrase fight in God's way, by which it adopted the meaning of to kill in God's way in the fight against unbelievers. Jihad, originally expressing the notion of self-defense, was finally linked to the offensive concept of conquest through raids, ghazwa. This was then retrospectively applied to Muhammad's military action. It went backwards, which were all identified as conquests, thus contradicting the historical evidence that they were in fact defensive battles of survival, and this includes the Battle of Tabuk. The identification of jihad with conquest is unacceptable. The meaning attached to the terms conquest or invasion is always pejorative. There are no positives or beneficial conquests. We say Hitler's Germany conquered France during the Second World War, and the word conquest gives Germany's war a negative and aggressive connotation. We also say the French fought against the German invasion, by which we attach a positive significance to the fight of the French against the invasion. The term ghazwa was taken from the vocabulary of Jahiliyya Arabs. They regularly carried out raids into neighboring tribes seeking booty by extremely violent means. In flagrant contradictions with the Qur'anic term jihad, the fuqaha revived this aggressive concept of conquest and projected its meaning on the concept of defensive battle. In order to do so, the jurists had to produce a semantic transformation of a whole list of terms in the book: shahada, shaheed, istishhad, shuhada, daraba fi sabilillah, and such, by which the true ironic meaning was stripped off and a false belligerent meaning put on, and hence constructing an Islamic concept of conquest, which is really was the old tribal notion of an offensive raid. As a result, the shuhada of the book were turned into soldiers of Islam, and a shaheed was turned into a fanatical warrior who falls heroically on the battlefield. This is in spite of the fact that a shaheed needs to be alive and ceases to be a shaheed when he dies. The decline of political culture in the Arab Muslim world started immediately after Muhammad's death. It was triggered by the political crisis caused by the caliphate of Uthman ibn Affan. His leadership had alienated a growing number of people who eventually demanded his removal from power. Uthman's reluctance to give up power and to hold on to it as long as he could caused the breakdown of political culture, which eventually led to Uthman being killed by his opponents. We see in this event the beginning of a fatal development of political corruption. The rulers' fear of assassination by their opponents, the tendency to hold on to power for as long as possible, the frustration of political opposition leading to calls for violent resistance, lack of democracy, plurality, and a will to reform. We can identify 5 aspects that were decisive for the deterioration of political culture in the Arab Muslim world and for the emergence of the concept of martyrdom in Islamic thought. 1. The term consultation, shura, who conduct their affairs by mutual consultation, who spent out of what we bestow on them for sustenance, Shura 38. Despite the clear ruling of the book that consultation has to be mutual and consensual, Shura came to be understood as the ruler's prerogative to allow his subjects to voice discontent, which he was, however, free to ignore. In contrast to a true, open, and democratic system of mutual consultation as practiced by the Prophet, who accepted collective decisions even if they did not reflect his own views, Shura was reduced to a means of identifying potential critics of the regime. If people dared to articulate views that threatened the ruler's position, they were eventually silenced by imprisonment and torture. 2. The emergence of the concept of dispatching, sending of tasir. This was practiced in 2 ways. 1, by escorting a group of critics to the ruler's palace where intimidated and frightened by the presence of fully armed guards, they had to listen to the views of the despot without being given the chance to respond. 2, by sending them unescorted tasir as soldiers to the front where they had to fight and die alongside the troops of professional ghazwa warriors. For their comfort and psychological assurance, they were made to believe that their fight was a form of jihad. This convinced the warriors who fought bloody wars that they were in fact mujahideen. It did not take long for this ideological dilemma to lead to a confusion between ghazwa and jihad. Historical documents show that this terminological confusion occurred in the transition period between the era of the rightly guided caliphs and the beginning of Umayyad rule. By the time the Islamic fiqh emerged, a clear distinction between ghazwa and jihad had already completely disappeared. The mujahideen were subsequently defined as warriors for the cause of Allah, and shuhada became the martyrs of Islam who were given a guaranteed entry ticket to paradise. 3. The practice of eviction, to force people to leave their houses and send them into exile, has become a favorite way to silence critics of the regime. 4. Manipulation by bribery. If the above three methods did not yield the expected results, tactics had to be changed. After having been kept in abject poverty for a humiliating long period of time. You have to excuse my stumbling. Critics were suddenly showered with money, goods, and all sorts of privileges. The aim was to corrupt the souls by asking them to join the ranks of the mercenaries who yearned after the booty gained in the most recent raids and who became rich by amassing the plundered goods of foreign people, and who would listen to the criticism of a corrupted soul. 5. Physical elimination, the last and final solution when all other strategies have failed. Our point of contention is this fatal confusion of power politics and religious doctrine. As a result, a political doctrine of jihad emerged that justified the military conquest of foreign cultures. It justified in religious terms the sacrifice of soldiers and the political elimination of opponents by declaring the enemy infidels and the fallen soldiers martyrs. The peaceful sermon that wanted to persuade people in a good and convincing argument to follow the paths of God was abandoned in favor of parading the military might of brutal warriors. This book's call to travel the world in God's way turned into a pretext to spread Islam by the sword, which in fact was just another ideological pretext for looting and plundering foreign villages and cities. As usual, the prophetical hadiths were used to replace the peaceful message of the book with a more bellicose rendering that legitimized the political goals of the regimes. Just look at how executives interpreted the political neutral read, purely soteriological term victory. Verily we have granted you a manifest victory, Fath 1. When comes the help of God and victory, Nasr 1. For no reason whatsoever, Fath in conjunction with Nasr 1 became in both verses Allah's description of Muhammad's conquest of Mecca in 630. This interpretation ignores the fact that in Surah 48 verse 2 and 3, the text clearly specifies why the Prophet was granted success or victory, namely that he had secured four things from God: A. His forgiveness of sins, B. His grace, 3. His guidance to the straight path, and D. His powerful help. Nothing supports the connection made by the exegetists between the conquest of Mecca and Allah's granting of these four things. The error of the exegetists is even more obvious if we look at other verses that use the term Fath. In the God is our trust, our Lord, decide you, iftah, between us and our people in truth, for you are the best to decide. A'raf 89. If the people of the towns had but believed and feared God, we should indeed have opened out lafatahna to them all kinds of blessing from heaven and earth. Al-A'raf 96. Yet you, prophets, will see the perverse at the heart rushing to them for protection, saying, we are afraid fortune may turn against us, but God may well bring about a triumph, bil-fath, or some other event of his own making. Then they will rule the secret they harbored in their hearts. Ma'idah 52. The first verse employs the imperative iftah, you decide, in the sense of God's command. The second verse uses fatahna, we opened out, to refer to God's blessing, while the third verse, fataha, victory, to suggest the possibility of reconciliation or peacemaking with those in whose hearts is a disease. What on earth made executives think that these verses describe military activities and success on the battlefield? We fear that the medieval commentators allow their ideological agenda to hijack the non-bellicose connotation of the book. How else can we explain why they understood Al-Fath al-Azim as a reference to a situation of war, that is, to the siege of a town by an army and to the imminent demolition of its walls by the attacking force in the following verse? Say, our Lord will gather us together and will in the end decide the matter between us and you in truth, bil-haqq, and justice, wa huwa al-Fath al-Azim. Sabah, verse 26. Let us finally explore whether chapter 3, verse 169 really justifies martyrdom in the name of Islam. We will first quote the verse in full and then attach our commentary summarized in 5 points. Prophet, do you think لا تحسبن of those who have been killed in God's way الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله as dead, they are alive with their Lord عند ربهم, well provided for? Al-Imran 169. 1. The verse mentions those who have been killed in God's way الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله. Death in God's way can be caused by a multitude of reasons. We believe that it is inexcusable to reduce this only to death on the battlefield. The hadith of Muhammad cites over 10 different types of people who are killed in God's way. These types can be applied if removed from the narrow context of 7th century Arabia to almost all inhabitants of this world. However, in order to be real shuhada, the condition is that they are alive. If they are killed and given their lives for the defense of their shahada, they must not have killed anyone for this and should not have purposefully intended to be dead. We heard the conditions stated in the book that a shaheed is an eyewitness who must be alive. If he dies, his witness ends, and after which, as the example of Jesus tells us, God takes over as a watcher and witness, chapter 5, verse 117. 2. If we accept a literal reading of chapter 3, verse 2, those who have been killed are still alive with the Lord, and thus follow the exegetes, we would commit the sin of anthropomorphism. Moreover, we would contradict logic. If we, for example, understand literally that those killed in God's way are not really dead, but live with their Lord, we would assume that they physically found a place with Him. Such a reading not only anthropomorphizes God, it also divinizes mortal souls. And both of these things are theologically untenable. The notion that these people are only seemingly dead also contradicts the clear evidence of the decay of their bodies in the grave. It is absurd to claim that they possess holy bodies which remain fresh and free from any decomposition until the day of judgment, when evidence proves the opposite. 3. For correct interpretation of chapter 3, verse 169, we must avoid the confusion between soul and spirit. It is the soul, nafs, that returns to the dust, that is, to its original state. It is God that takes the soul of men at death, Zumar 47. But the spirit, ruh, returns, not necessarily ascends to God, its creator, who breathed it into his creature when they developed into rational human beings who are able to think in abstract terms. Death has therefore 2 meanings. A material physical meaning that implies decay and decomposition. Every soul shall have a taste of death, Anbiya 35. And 2, the symbolic figurative meaning of absence or lack of something. For example, the light of light, when death means darkness, is a dead person brought back to life by us and given light with which to walk among people, comparable to someone trapped in a deep darkness who cannot escape. An'am 122. While the first meaning is covered by the term maut, real death, the second meaning is contained in the term wafa, absence. Number 4, verse 3 of 169 starts with an imperative. Think not. The Arabic لا تحسبن is derived from the verb hasaba, used here negatively in the sense of to be deluded or to wrongly assume. In this sense, it is used 45 times in the book, indicating that someone is really different from how it appears on the surface. Think not, لا تحسبن, that God does not heed the deeds of those who do wrong. Ibrahim 42. Does man think, يحسب, that we cannot assemble his bones? Qiyamah 3. The imperative, think not, in chapter 3 verse 169 is intended to correct a misconception of death. The verb format لا تحسبن, third person singular, even though formally directed at the Prophet only, actually addresses all human beings, men and women. With his rebuke, Allah wants to forbid his noble Prophet from assuming that those killed in God's way are dead while they are in reality alive for him. He wants Muhammad to understand that both life and death must not always be understood literally or physically, that someone whom our eyes cannot see and our hands cannot touch could still be with God. An example, his eyes alive. If life and death were to be physically or biologically understood in chapter 3 verse 169, its message, they are alive, would be a lie, because our human senses would contradict it, which is categorically impossible. In sum, to understand this verse to mean that those who are killed on the battlefield spreading the religion of Islam by the sword are not really dead, since their bodies will not decay, and since they and their unharmed bodies will still find a space near God, is as ridiculous as it is dangerous, because we're talking about both sides, both parties nowadays claiming they're dead are shuhada. So if they're fighting and were killed down here, I'm sure they'll be fighting and killing each other up there. That's just my point. It is a fundamental misreading of every single word of this verse, and executives who do so must be accused of anthropomorphism, literalism, and then over-reliance on the military history of nascent Islam. In this section, it was our aim to identify the verses that have been illegitimately loaded with the semantic of war, and we hope that we have given sufficient evidence for this. In the next section, we will study the verses that must be read within the context of killing in Allah's way. Fight. Al-Qital is next.